So we're up for our next session. It's titled Less Taxing, More Relaxing. I think something we can all appreciate. It's automating tax and compliance in e-commerce with Avalara. The two speakers are Evan Owens and Adam Fabian. Evan Owens introducing, he's a tax technology specialist with 10 years of experience, including 7 years at Avalara. He leads a team dedicated to building strategic partnerships that simplify tax compliance and drive success for business and their customers worldwide. Adam Fabian is a visionary leader in the digital commerce landscape with over 12 years of expertise driving innovation in the e-commerce industry. So I'll hand it off to them.
Thanks.
Thank you.
How's everybody doing? Thank you for being brave enough to come and sit through a talk about sales tax. Appreciate that. We got here, okay, title slide. So you know what? I can't read that from here, so I'm going to stand over here and read it right off even though you're not supposed to do that. So I just want to cover a little bit about who we are, how we work with Adobe. Then Adam will talk a little bit about Crimson Agility and share some examples of some mutual customers that we've been able to work with together. So a little bit about Avalara. Just who's heard of Avalara before? How good's our marketing been? Pretty good. Okay, cool. So when we started this business, really the only companies that could afford to automate sales tax solutions were Fortune 500. The only options available were on-premise. They took a heavy load to implement and maintain, and they were very, very expensive, like $200,000-$300,000 solutions, and we're talking about early 2000s. And so Avalara recognized the gap between that offering and all the burgeoning e-commerce businesses and small businesses that were out in the world. And so they launched this company in 2004 with the idea of making the solution cloud-based and accessible to all business sizes. And as we've grown, it's kind of the point of this slide, as you can see, we've got to a point where we're almost 5,000 employees. We have somewhere in the neighborhood of 40,000 customers, and we have them of all sizes. We have little tiny mom and pops that are selling on Etsy, and we have giant Fortune 100 companies that are selling internationally, and kind of everything in between. So really the reason that we point that out is to show, first of all, this huge need that was filled, but also the fact that we have the kind of the scale and capability to serve whatever size businesses that you're operating today. And as you're growing and you're evolving, you can know that our solutions designed to support that level of growth. And so another big part of why we're here, sales tax is hard. If you live in your own community and you think about sales tax, you think of it as this 7 or 8 or 9% thing that gets added to the top of your cost. But for a business, it can be very complex. And it comes down to things like, you can see some of these stats here about the number of different rates there are, the number of different product types there are. There's things called sales tax holidays where, hey, we're not going to charge sales tax in this state on these dates because it's back to school and we want to give consumers a break. And businesses had to stay on top of all that, right? In order to charge the right amount, you had to know what the correct rates were. You had to know all the dates changing, everything you had to be able to stay on top of. And it's incredibly complex. And if you have a shop that sits on Main Street, it's probably not that hard. You've got a rate, that's what your local area charges. If you're in e-commerce and you're shipping all over the country or maybe even all over the world, that gets very sophisticated very quickly. A lot of companies that we start with are in just a couple of states, and then as they grow and grow and grow, it gets more and more complicated, and our solution gives them the ability to take care of that issue. Oops, I went backwards. Okay, so I have another question for you. Who's heard of South Dakota versus Wayfair? Okay, so this is interesting to me. So South Dakota versus Wayfair is a Supreme Court ruling that was decided in June of 2018. Prior to that ruling, in order for you to determine your business needed to collect tax, there was a rule that everybody followed called physical nexus, which meant that if you had a business in New York, you had to file and register in New York, right? And then if you decided to open up a location in Texas, you would have to register and file in Texas. But if you were selling, I think we can all remember the good old days of e-commerce where we could order things and we didn't get taxed, right? And then slowly that started changing because what they started doing is looking at ways to make different types of business activities physical nexus. But sometimes they couldn't. Sometimes there was just no physical connection whatsoever. So the state of South Dakota sued sued Wayfair, which is a furniture retailer you're probably familiar with. They're a very large company. They're selling millions and millions of dollars of product into South Dakota. They're not collecting any tax, and they're disadvantaging the local businesses that do collect tax, right? If they sold it for the same price, they lose by 8%, right? But then also you have the size of Wayfair. So small businesses are struggling, states aren't getting their revenue, so they took it to court. And Supreme Court looked at that and said, no, the business climate has changed. The days of everybody selling in brick and mortar is no longer valid. That's no longer applicable. So for the ruling, the Supreme Court ruled to enable South Dakota to require a business to register and file taxes if they sold 200 transactions per year or $100,000 in revenue. If either of those things happen, they could compel that business to register and file, or else be at the risk of being fined or audited. So with the Supreme Court ruling behind it, you might expect that everybody jumped on board, and boy did they. So every single state that has a sales tax, there are 5 that do not, every one that does has a threshold that's called economic nexus. Some are $100,000 in business. Some are 200 transactions or $100,000 in business. Some are $500,000, like New York here, it's $500,000. But bottom line is, if you are shipping across multiple states, depending on the amount of business you're doing, you might have triggered economic nexus. And we constantly have customers that come to us because unfortunately they find out through audit, or hopefully they come to one of our talks and they find out from that, that they've been maybe doing business in some of these states and they're in a position where they need to get registered and filed. So if you are selling into multiple states and $100,000 sounds like a reasonable amount of business for an individual state for you, I would encourage you to do some research, reach out. We actually have a number of offerings to help you evaluate where you're at, whether you need our solution or not. We can help you determine whether or not you have exposure. But it's a huge shift in the way that businesses are exposed to tax obligation today. And by the lack of hands that went up, it's astonishing to me that it's not more widely known. But it is still very, very serious and important that you understand if your business has got exposure for that. So in regards to how Avalara works with Adobe Commerce, these are a list of some of our solutions and our customers. But Avalara solves a number of problems. When we started, it was really just about tax compliance. It was really just about helping customers come up with the correct rates and charging correctly. But as it's evolved, we also now do cross-border, so duties and taxes, anything that you're importing. One of the obstacles if you're doing international business is that it calculates that you sell it for the amount, and then if you don't have duties and taxes included, when it gets to the border, it gets held up and the consumer has to pay for it. And if they decide they don't want to, then the product doesn't get delivered, right? VAT and GST taxes. So for our friends up in Canada that do the GST taxes, or if you're selling internationally, the VAT filing and reporting can be very important too. We have a solution for beverage and alcohol. We manage exemption certificates for business-to-business sales, and then ultimately file the returns on behalf of our clients. That's a whole other very long, complex process. And then we also, we integrate into Adobe Commerce. Effectively, the way that you would look at our business is you're trying to grow your own. The question is, how much time and resource do you want to put towards managing a compliance risk? A lot of companies choose to look at payroll as something that, hey, we don't need to be good at this. It's just a cost of doing business. Let's let the pros take care of it. And that's the way we would ask you to look at sales tax compliance. There are really smart people on your teams in your accounting department that can help you expand new markets. They can help you improve your accounts receivables. They can help you do a lot of things to improve efficiencies. This is literally just keeping the government off your tail, right? If you do really, really, really good at this, you just don't hear from anybody. That's the best case scenario. There's no gold stars, there's no cash and prizes. So, what we do is we allow our customers to focus on marketing and growing their business so that they can just be sure that as they expand into new products and markets, all their offerings are taxed correctly. And this is kind of like a quick overview of our ecosystem. We've built this very vast, very rich ecosystem that kind of starts with, you'll see a bunch of brand names you'll recognize from a technology perspective. These are the various ERPs and e-commerce platforms that we connect with. And then expanding beyond that, we work with accounting partners. A lot of them are helping develop your tax strategy. And then a lot of those companies will recommend a solution like ours to take that burden off of you. And then kind of on the outer edge of it, but I think kind of the most important part of it is our consulting partners. And these are the folks that are implementing solutions, and during that process are helping our customers realize where we can come in and add value to the overall tech stack that they're working through. And at this point, I'd like to introduce you guys to Adam, who I think they did at the top of the call, but, oh, I skipped a slide. No, I didn't. I'm going backwards again. Don't let me do that. There we go. So Adam is one of our prized system integration partners, and we'll tell you a little bit about his business as well.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I was going to ask, raise your hands if you've heard of Crimson Agility, but I don't want to be worried. Two, fantastic. My name is Adam Fabian. I am the CIO and one of the co-founders of Crimson Agility. We are a solutions implementation agency. We've been partnered with Magento now for about 10 years. Actually, this year is our 10th year, this month, in fact. Been in the ecosystem now for 12 years. We are a gold partner, commerce specialized. We've had a couple of awards and been growing over the last few years. What I want to speak about related to Crimson before we jump into some of these customer examples is that our focus has always been customer first. I think that's what everybody would say here, right? Same thing. But customer first in terms of consulting and strategy. We want to make sure that you're getting the proper solution for the problem that you have, for your vertical, for your industry, and prepare to be scalable into the future. So one of the reasons why I'm proud to speak here with Avalara is because we heavily rely on their solution for almost all of our customers. They are one of the easiest ways of taking a burden away from the customer that tends to be extremely costly, time-consuming. There's a lot of management related to it, and he's outlined quite a few of those problems as well, and we'll go through some solutions that we've implemented as well. So next slide. So as I mentioned, we are a client-centric company. We focus very heavily on our delivery. We focus on our quality, all of our developers being certified and ensuring that they're delivering the highest level to our customers. But we're really proud, I think, at our core of being a consulting agency. We are going to sit and listen and learn before we ever begin implementing anything for you. So we'll focus on where your needs are, what are your current pain points, looking towards the future, what do you want to be in 2 or 3 years, what are your goals, and try to compare that to other companies in the industry to ensure that you're staying current with verticals and technology topics. There's a quote down there from one of our companies, BioFreeze, that we work with as part of Performance Health, a large healthcare company. But yeah, we try to focus on the clients, and that's where we were led to Avalara, because we built a huge network of partnerships amongst service providers that we want to rely on. We only keep the ones that are going to add value to our customers, and immediately, of course, Avalara is one of the top there. So first one I'm going to introduce you to is called DIY Pest Control. It's do-it-yourself pest control. Essentially, it's a company that sells pest control products for your home usage. You can buy the same pest control products that you would normally pay someone to come to your house and do, and they'll even give you some educational pieces on how to implement them. You can also buy the materials as well for applications, the sprayers, the nozzles, the various things that you need. They have even started a subscription service recently where you can get them to send you the actual pest control products you need by season and by zip code. That's a customization that we made for them as well. Extremely high level of tax challenges. They have 2 nexuses. You mentioned that word, I was going to bring it up too. 2 nexuses, one in Arizona and one in Atlanta, Georgia. And so immediately they have kind of a tax situation that would be considered abnormal or unique to them. But the big challenge for them is that they are selling a product that has poison essentially inside of it, chemicals that are highly regulated and highly controlled. Laws across various counties, states, cities are extremely different, especially as you get towards the West Coast. I believe in California there's even cases where some homes are split in half because of zip code changes. So as they're being shipped to these destinations, it's almost impossible for them to keep up with this changing flux of laws. So one of their biggest challenges here was that they originally were actually doing a flat tax across the board. And that flat tax comes with an enormous amount of risk. Overcharging and not sending that in as an overage is considered, I believe it's considered a crime. And underreporting is going to end up in fines, or you're going to have a loss of revenue because you're going to have to pay it yourself out of your pocket. So, and in order to stay current with that, they were spending a high amount of time hiring individuals to actually sit and try to enter these tax codes. For those of you that used Adobe Commerce's tax system, it's not that simple to actually implement with all of those zip codes. It works if you're using large-scale ones, but the range itself is very difficult. So we implemented this for this customer, and immediately the result was that they were able to actually optimized their process, and it actually resulted in more orders. There was a higher level of conversion because their tax rate went down. So customers all of a sudden saw savings on products that they were normally paying the same exact price for. Their orders were suddenly cheaper. So they were able to actually add more to their budget, add more to their cart. They decided to spend more for this customer. In addition to that, the amount of time that it freed up allowed them to invest in the subscription process that I just talked about. So they were able to focus their efforts on a later process and start expanding their business beyond what they currently had. And now they are doing the highest level of sales, and they actually were recently acquired due to the growth in revenue over time. So this was just a small piece of that pie, but it was an important piece because it stabilized their process and made sure that they were, highly profitable. Second one I have for you is Izel Native Plants. Native plants, Izel Native Plants, what they do is they actually sell native plants from growers in potentially wholesale amounts. We're not talking about the Walmart, I'm going to buy the orchid that I'm never going to water and it's going to die in 2 months plants, but we're talking about pots and plants and actually pallets of large-scale plants that you can purchase. These plants are not grown by Izel Plants. In fact, Izel does not actually grow anything themselves at all. They are actually the knowledge base, the experts. They understand what plants can be sold where, when, why, what seasons, etc. So what they had a problem with was they were vendor distributed. So they consume data feeds, which we customized for them to consume from all their various vendors. We optimized it so that they could actually schedule delivery dates for their customers, another customization we built. On top of that, we allowed them to start shipping to only specific sections. As an example, I am based out of Phoenix, Arizona. They cannot ship to me at all. The laws in Arizona dictate that they cannot ship live plants. Something about biological laws, I'm not going to pretend that I know what I'm talking about there, but they're not allowed to ship to me. So they're based out of Washington, D.C. That's where the actual office is. All of their vendors drop ship from where they grow, and they tend to expand and sometimes grow beyond just the one field or the one location, which creates an incredibly complex tax situation. They have to figure out when they're placing the order at the time on the front end, when a customer is on their website, how much tax is that going to charge? So that requires knowing the locations, the destinations. They have to then calculate it themselves. For a long time, they just did not collect tax, which is devastating, an incredible bill that they received at the end of the year. So I introduced them to Avalara, and they are currently live with them. Couldn't have been happier. They truly saw the power in it because it shows you the breakdown in which your taxes are city, state, potentially even extra tax. There's itemized line item taxes. So that portion of the tax breakdown for them was invaluable. They don't have the time, the manpower, the capacity to actually build those taxes in. So they could focus on what was important, marketing their material, marketing their plants, as well as creating knowledge base for that and targeting other customers, right? So this, for us, has become one of the go-to solutions that I can recommend. Avalara simplifies our process. I can customize, Crimson Agility as a whole can make any customizations you want to build the business flow, but on the other end of things, we do not know the laws enough, neither does the customer, and it's not truly something that's feasible. You can't become that sort of an expert. I would imagine everyone in here, except maybe you, knows all those tax laws at the moment. So it's something we rely on their experts. And one of the key things that I tell people when they're asking, is Avalara the right answer? Is this the thing that I should use to help my business out? Avalara does the state's taxes for 18 states. They don't do their own. So if the government is willing to take it off their hands and put it in their hands, that seems pretty liable. And not only that, but I've never had a single complaint when it comes to that, just because of the efficiency as well. So, right, and as part of our trusted partner network, we rely on them heavily. We go to them for advice on what they should do. We've used them in another case for a company called Frontier Co-op, where they are selling across 6 different websites, and they have a large-scale implementation. And I believe this year so far, they've already collected $600,000 in taxes. And they compared it to last year when they weren't using Avalara, to where they collected $250,000. And the sales are only up about 12%. So math-wise, that doesn't actually check out for the amount of tax that they collected. They received a bill at the end of the year last year. This year, they will not. They are perfectly insulated from that. So, right, and I could go on and spout the benefits of that as well, but as an implementation partner, it makes it extremely easy for me not to have to think about, is my customer at risk? Are they scalable into the future? Is this going to keep them from risk in future situations as well? So, but I'll turn it over to you, because I do believe you have some statistics on some additional features to it. But
yeah,
there you go.
I'm going to walk over here with you because I realize I spent the whole rest of the time standing right in the middle of the screen. And thank you for all the stories that you just shared. So yeah, we actually commissioned an economic impacts study with Forrester, and basically this is just kind of showing the kind of return on investment, right? Our solution's not free, and a lot of people will view what they do today as free, right? We're using our own staff, we're taking care of handling this on our own. And so just to kind of give an idea of when you factor in the amount of time that's being spent and the potential risk associated with it and whatever content you're purchasing in order to complete your solution, basically giving you an idea of what an average ROI looks like for a business. But it does require you to think a little bit differently, right? I mean, you have something, again, today that's there. There's a tax calculation is pretty simple. Can be done on any calculator, right? It's X times Y equals Z. The issue companies run into is when do they need to be charging it and what's that actual effective rate they need to be charging, and that gets very complicated. And so again, if you're on Main Street and you've got a shop, you're probably great. If you're growing fast and you're expanding into multiple new jurisdictions, it would be worth at very minimum finding out what the economic impact is from Economic Nexus and understanding where your kind of potential exposure is, and whether you use that information to bolster your own solution or you decide to work with Avalara, we'd love to have you. One thing I hate about these types of presentations, they come across very like the wolf's at your door. And it probably isn't, but if it is, it's just very painful, it's very time consuming, it's very expensive. And so I personally make it my mission when I'm doing these kind of talks is just make sure people are aware. A bunch of you now, 20 people now know about Economic Nexus in South Dakota versus Wayfair. So do a little research, find out, and if we can help you, I hope you'll reach out. We have a booth just right outside if you want to come by and say hello. We'd love to scan your badge and send you some info, or if you just want to have a conversation, we're there and eager to speak to you. So if you have any questions, happy to field those now. In the back?
Is there a time of year that's better for someone to switch to Avalara? Like beginning of the year or?
I mean, you know, we're a sales organization. You can usually twist the arm of a sales guy a little bit more in December than you can in April. But really, when we see people make the change, either they've recognized there's a gap in what they're doing now and it's a priority. It sometimes becomes a priority when it's inconvenient. When they're implementing a new solution, that happens a lot. Like if you're implementing a new e-commerce solution, if you're moving to a new version, that's a great time, right? You're going to go through some setup anyway. It is a funny thing because it's easy to look at that as something that if you're implementing the solution, I'll do it later, but you have to turn on the internal tables anyway. So if it's something you're considering, that's a good time. But yeah, I guess I would just say if you're growing and you feel like that there's some changes coming, then sooner is better. Yeah.
I've done implementations several times of the year, different times of the year. There is always an onboarding process, as you mentioned. So you have to explain your use cases, define the rates. They have to set it up to ensure that it's correct. There's always the staging implementation with their sandbox to ensure you check it, especially when you have things like the tax exemptions certificates that you offer as well, those types of things. There's a lot of testing that has to go into it. So as you mentioned, sooner rather than later, because then you can choose when you want to actually launch it. So if you want it to coincide with the end of the financial year, which is I think what you're probably getting closer to, what you're thinking about, because it's a little more difficult to reduce the risk for the full next year, then you could start it now, have it prepared, and then launch it January 1st if you wanted to.
Anybody else? Yeah, sure.
I had some general question. You shared some success stories.
Mhm.
Could you share some not success stories? What happened wrong and you can cover?
With Avalara or with just in general?
With the e-commerce project it's a task Avalara yet to cover.
I mean, I can tell you gaps in what we do. Like there are some we can't support cannabis products because the money's federally insured and we receive those funds. So like that's a gap. Unfortunately, we'd love to be able to support those businesses. We get leads all the time, but until there's a federal law that supports that industry, we won't be able to. There's some very niche things that we don't really get too much into, but it's getting less and less. So, I mean, a lack of success for me would just be we didn't have the content to cover that client's needs. But our solution, like, it works. We've got 40,000 people using it. So, you know what I mean? It's our 40 companies, rather. So it's just a matter of whether or not we support your business. But it's an interesting question, though. Do you have, like, something that you experienced, or?
No,
Just curious. Okay. Yeah.
And from my perspective, there's always failures. But there is usually we try our best to mitigate as much as possible. I believe probably most of the failure is a miscommunication of some sort. But as best I can, I try to find that middle ground before we get to that point. As much communication as possible, strategy and ahead of time, just to make sure you're prepared. But from their perspective, if we've already gotten to the point where they're onboarded, there's really no point at that point. They will tell you straight up before they even begin that process that it's going to function properly. So.
I think we've overstayed our welcome already, but if anybody has a question, please come see us at the booth. We're happy to chat. Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Thanks, Adam and Evan.